Today's reading is from Hosea, starting at chapter 1 and verse 2. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, "Go, marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her, for like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord." So he married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Moving on to chapter 3. The Lord said to me, "Go show your love to your wife again, though she is loved by another man and is adulterous. Love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and love the sacred raisin cakes." So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and about a homer and a lethek of barley. Then I told her, "You are to live with me many days. You must not be a prostitute or be intimate with any man, and I will behave the same way towards you. For the Israelites will live many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred stones, without ephod or household gods. Afterwards, the Israelites will return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They will come trembling to the Lord and to his blessings in the last days."
Well, good morning and welcome to Hosea. So thank you, Davo, for reading that rather difficult text. So back in December, a group of us who lead the services and do preaching and are involved in children and youth work, we met together to talk about this sermon series that we're in the middle of now in this period. And before that meeting, I went through all the different Bible readings that had been set. It was actually Will who chose these Bible readings. And out of all of them, and if you've been here the last few weeks, you'll know there's been some pretty tough ones. But out of all of them, it was this one that really cut to my heart, actually. It was this one that really made me feel upset. And then later I went to look at the preaching rota, which I'd put together myself, to see what I was going to be preaching on, and here we are today. I'm preaching on this. So it's difficult material. Also, just to be aware that what we generally do is that the sermon series that we have upstairs here, the children and the young people will generally go through the same kind of material. But I have been assured that it will be age appropriate, what is being delivered. And particularly, Vicky sent out a message to us parents of the youth saying that, we're going to look at Hosea. This is the passage, but the focus is going to be on the faithful love of God, which is indeed going to be my focus once we get onto that. And if there's any questions that come up are the more sensitive parts of this passage, then they're to ask those to the parents at home. So let's just say I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion with my son at lunchtime today. But so this is it's difficult, and I think anybody who has any experience of adultery, either as a perpetrator or a victim, or indeed any form of sexual sin or sexual abuse, then this is traumatic. Even if we've not experienced ourselves, if we know a loved one who has gone through that journey, then this is very difficult. And so we need to acknowledge this, that when we read these words, it might bring up these kind of feelings within us. And we may have mixed, at least, feelings towards some of the characters in this story, towards Gomer or Hosea, or even towards God himself, possibly. Because these sort of experiences, there's always a lot of evil in there, but there's often a lot of complexity too, and it's not quite it's not easy for us to know what to make of it. So here we have a very personal story, a tragic tale that is being played out in front of us. But really, this is giving us an insight into a much bigger story, the story of the love between God and his people. And that's the story that I want to focus on today. So a couple of weeks ago, Tina put a map on the screen, so I'm unapologetically using Tina's map again. So here it is, just to give us a little bit of an insight as to the context that we're looking at here. So we're in the 8th century BC, and quite recently the area of Israel got divided into two kingdoms: the lower kingdom called Judah, and the upper and the northern kingdom called Israel. And the prophet that we were looking at the last couple of weeks, Amos, and today's prophet Hosea, were speaking to this northern kingdom of Israel. And you could say that Amos and Hosea were a bit like good cop, bad cop when it came to preaching God's word. So Amos was all about God's judgment and his anger towards his people, basically. Whereas Hosea, believe it or not, is actually about God's mercy and his forgiveness. And so at this point in our sermon series, rather like the first snowdrops of spring, we actually have a bit of a turning point. We see there's hope here, and hopefully we will unpack that today. So although Hosea comes before Amos in the Bible, chronologically they're actually the other way round. Amos came first, and then Hosea came maybe about 20 years later. And other differences between them was that Amos's prophecies were spoken oracles, whereas Hosea also had some spoken prophecies as well, which we'll look at one of those next week. But this particular bit is what we call an acted oracle. So God's word was not proclaimed by what he said or what he wrote down, but by his actions, about what he did. And as we read, God told him to marry this woman, Gomer. We don't know so much about her. The Hebrew words here are a little bit difficult to interpret. It might be that she was a prostitute, but she was certainly a woman who had lived an adulterous life in some kind. And God asked Hosea to marry this woman. And even though they were married, she continued in adultery or in prostitution, and they had some children together, but at least one of those children wasn't even his. So it was a very, very messy situation. Then it sounds like at some point, they had a separation, but then God told Hosea, no, I want you to go back to your wife. I want you to buy her back. So I don't know quite what was going on there, but he had to actually spend quite a bit of money to buy her back, and said to her, now you've got to be faithful to me, and I will love you back. So this is what was happening here. And this is God using marriage as an illustration. Now, marriage is something that we all understand. In fact, I would say that every people group, every culture, right through history and right across the world, sort of understands the concept of marriage. People might call it something different. It might look something different in different cultures. But essentially, this idea of two people being together in love is something that we understand. Even if we're not married ourselves, it's a concept that we can comprehend. And God often uses the things from our everyday life, the tangible things that we can see and we can feel and we can understand, to enlighten us about who he is, to reveal himself to us through these things that we can comprehend and understand. So God reveals his love to us through this illustration of marriage, a love between two people. And we see this narrative right through scriptures. And one of the places we see it most is in the Song of Songs, which is a poetic book written by Solomon. And this is a story, a poem about two people, the lover and the beloved. And we can say that the Song of Songs is like the Jane Austen version of this story. Innocent virgins skipping through meadows, falling in love. While Hosea is definitely the EastEnders version of the story. But actually it is the same story. It is a story of love. Just that Hosea adds in a little bit of a dose of reality into that. So what is this love that God talks about? Now, one thing about the English language, it doesn't always help us a lot of the time. In spite of this huge vocabulary that we have, sometimes we just don't have the right words to express what the Bible is expressing. So our word love is a very broad word. It can mean different things to different people. It can mean different things in different contexts. And so it can be a difficult word to use. So I'm going to focus on a Hebrew word which I think sums up this marital love of God. And that is chesed. Chesed. So I do apologize to any Hebrew speakers, or indeed Arabic speakers in the room if I've pronounced that wrong. But this word chesed, as far as I can tell, appears only once in Hosea, and it's in a part that we didn't read today. But it's in this Bible, it's translated as betrothed. So this is the idea that God betroths himself to his people. He commits himself. He covenants himself. He chooses his beloved and he ties himself down. He locks himself in to that relationship. And that's not to say that it is cold and calculating. No, it is motivated by emotion, affection, desire for his people, and desire to be with them. But it's not a temporal thing. It's not something that ebbs and flows with your feelings and emotions and how our desires change and evolve. But it's something that is very much permanent. It's like, I've chosen you once, and I'm sticking by that choice. So those of us who have been married or have attended a wedding ceremony will know that people say vows when they get married to each other. And sort of goes something like this: I, so-and-so, take thee, so-and-so, to be my lawfully wedded wife/husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, in sicknesses and health, in richness, for richer, for poorer, forsaking all others, till death do us part. So I think I said all the right words, just probably not in the right order. But you get the gist of it. So that is the chesed love that a husband and a wife say to each other when they get married. And that, gives you an idea of what that really means. Of course, when you're standing up there at the altar, you're feeling full of the joys of this life together. but you realize that sometimes those feelings will ebb and flow, but you're saying here and now that, I'm committing to this. This is a lifelong commitment that I'm making, that we're making to each other. But of course, we know that marriage is a beautiful thing, but sometimes marriages do break down. And we see this here in this situation with Israel. We've already looked a lot at this. Nick was unpacking it last week about how the Israelites had turned away from the promises that they had made to God. They were living in idolatry. They turned away to other gods. And there was a huge amount of inequality and injustice and corruption going on in the land. In many ways, they were living in prosperity and peace, but there were the haves and the have-nots. There were people who had second homes, and there were people who had nothing. They were far, far away from the standard that God set for them. And the thing about adultery is that people are trying to have it both ways. It's like you like the security and the stability and the respectability of having a husband or wife at home and having a family and having a life that everybody could admire, but also wanting the excitement and the intrigue of having some relationship on the side. And of course, that only gets sustained by lies and more lies to cover up those lies. And even to the point of lying to oneself that somehow this affair that you're having is, in the circumstances, permissible. Many years ago, I remember a colleague telling me about when he went on a stag party with some people. And on that night, several of the men went off with prostitutes. And then he tells me he told me that a few weeks later, at the wedding itself, he saw those same men, all in their nice suits, with their wife with them, and their children, pretending as if everything was fine. And this colleague wasn't a Christian, but he was disgusted by this. And it wasn't so much the immorality that horrified him, but it was the hypocrisy of the whole situation. The fact that there were that these men were trying to make out that they were respectable family men, when the reality was they were nothing of the sort. And we may not engage in that kind of behavior, but do we have some of the same hypocrisy in our relationship with God? Do we like to turn up to church on a Sunday? Go through all the motions, sing the songs, look like a respectable Christian, but that doesn't reflect how we are in our private lives, in our homes, in our thoughts, in our hearts? This was certainly the case with Israel. They had the veneer of religion. It looked like everything was fine on the outside, but everything was broken in the middle. They were picking and choosing what parts of their religion they wanted. For them, it was the sacred raisin cakes, which sounds quite delicious, actually. It's almost as like they were coming to church for the nice biscuits, but they didn't want to be bothered with the more demanding aspects of their faith. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? So we talked earlier about marriage vows. So what does that mean for us in terms of our relationship with God? What are our marriage vows to Him? What is our covenant with Him? So if you'd like to put up the next passage, and I think this sums it up. And this comes from the Ten Commandments. I'm just going to turn back in my Bible to Deuteronomy chapter 5. Sorry, I should have done this earlier. Hear, Israel, the decrees and laws I declare in your hearing today. Learn them and be sure to follow them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. It was not with our ancestors that the Lord made this covenant, but with us, with all of us who are alive here today. The Lord spoke to you face to face out of the fire on the mountain. And he said, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son nor daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any of your foreigners residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Honour your father and your mother, as the Lord God has commanded you, so that you may live long and that it may go well with you in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbour. You shall not covet your neighbour's wife. You shall not set your desire on your neighbour's house or land, his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbour. See, it was this stuff that they had forgotten about. I think there's good evidence that they were pretty much failing to keep any of those 10 commandments. And we might think to ourselves, okay, well, we're Christians now. We've got a new covenant. Jesus came and made things new. Well, yes, he did. But the new covenant isn't about throwing everything away that was before and coming up with something completely new. Completely not. The new covenant that Jesus brings is an expansion of this old covenant. It's bringing people from other nations and all nations of the world into this same covenant that he started with his chosen people, Israel. So this stuff still applies. And this is maybe where we should start when we think about our own commitment to God. In our small group recently, we've been going through a series on the Sabbath, part of Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. And the Sabbath was part of the Ten Commandments that we've just read. And most recently, we've looked at this idea of Sabbath being about worship. And in the video that we watched, there was this quote by David Foster Wallace that I think gives us some insight into what worship is all about. So I'm going to read that quote to you. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshipping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And the compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough, never feel you have enough. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you. Worship power. You will feel weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to keep the fear at bay. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart. You will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out, and so on. And in our group, we would challenge ourselves with the question, what are those things that we worship instead of God? Who are those other lovers that we have in our life? And we were quite honest about it. Sometimes things in the past or things that we still struggle with now. Those other things that dominate our thoughts and desires, that dominate our time and how we spend our money, that take us away from full and fulfilling love with God. So I wonder what happened to Hosea. We don't really know. We don't really hear any of the story beyond this point. I like to think that it was a happily ever after story. That Gomer remained faithful. They remained faithful to each other, and they lived out their lives into old age together. That's what I hope happened. But what we do know is what happened to Israel. Just 10 years after Hosea did this and said these words, they were invaded by Assyria, and basically the country was no more. They had failed to heed these warnings. The prophecies about their future came true. They had a chance to repent, but they didn't. And so almost what they'd chosen came to pass. They wanted the veneer of religion. They were content with that, with an emptiness inside. But what they ended up with, even that veneer of religion, even that pretense and that framework was completely destroyed as well. And they had nothing left. But God never gave up on them. God was not afraid to have his heart broken. And he continued to pursue them. He continued to be true to his covenant with them. And of course, eventually that led him to the Messiah, Jesus, born of a virgin, God himself being among us. Jesus, of course, had many roles, but one of them was as the bridegroom. The bridegroom who pursues his bride, who loves her and is waiting for her. And we, as the church, are his bride, his beloved. And we have this amazing future to look forward to, when this marriage will finally be consummated and we will live happily ever after with him. But he invites us into that relationship now, to fully betroth ourselves to him now. So my challenge to you today, to us today as a church, is, do we want to have this both ways? Are we content to have a partial religion, a religion that kind of suits us nicely, coming to church, having the respectability, but without the substance behind it? Or are we going to be fully committed to him? So maybe today, as we think about the lead up to Valentine's Day, why don't we take this opportunity to renew our vows? To renew our commitment to these promises that we've made to him. May we delight in his love for us and recommit to love, honour and obey him.